Hi, I'm Chance.
And I'm Sarah Catherine.
And this is Conservation Connection.
Presented by Last Chance Endeavors.
We run a wildlife education nonprofit focused on connecting students to their environment.
Each week here on Conservation Connection, we do just that by introducing you to the groundbreaking science and conservation work that's happening every day around the country.
We talk to professionals in the world of conservation science and wildlife management and ask them about their career,
their current projects,
their wild and crazy stories from the field,
and everything in between.
Join us each week to discover just how these dedicated people are working to protect our planet. Alrighty guys, welcome to another episode of Conservation Connection. We are very excited to be sitting down with Laura Park Figueroa, who is the founder of a nature-based pediatric practice called Outdoor Kids Occupational Therapy.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
We're super excited that we could get you on the schedule today while we're here in Atlanta. So let's just go ahead and dive right in. Tell us what Outdoor Kids Occupational Therapy is, how it got started. Just give us the background.
Okay, so I started the practice early in 2016. I started the practice because I had started doing some work with kids outdoors in large group settings, like large group camps. And what I was finding was that there were several kids who that environment did not work for them. They really needed more support than we were able to give them in a large group setting. And so I decided, I was a little nervous actually because it was so outside of the box in my profession to actually work all outdoors with children. But I decided to, instead of just doing those camp experiences during the summers, to actually niche my whole occupational therapy practice to outdoor work with kids. And so I developed a model where we individually assess all the kids who come in. We set goals for each child with the family. And then we provide all of our services in small groups or individually. We are starting to do some individual services now as well for families, you know, if kids want to come individually to get individual therapy. But most of our work is in small groups. And so out of that work, I developed an approach called the Contigo approach. So it stands for connection and transformation in the great outdoors. It also means with you in Spanish, which is really cute.
I love that.
Yeah, like we're with families, we're with nature. And so the Contigo approach really launched me into training other therapists as well. I'm working on a PhD, and so my research and literature review in the PhD helped me kind of create the Contigo approach in a way that is rooted in actual practice of nature-based therapy with children, but also based on evidence. I'm really big on evidence informing what we do in our work with kids to get the best outcomes for them. So, yeah, that approach got developed, and then we created it into an online course after we had done one in-person training. So now we have that as an online course. And out of that grew Therapy in the Great Outdoors, which is now a membership community. There's free areas where people can get resources related to nature-based pediatric therapy work, as well as we're going to have in the next few months some paid areas for like more in-depth coaching, business coaching to help support pediatric therapists starting nature-based practices with kids. So I think that's it.
Awesome. Well, that was a great answer. And actually, before we go too much further, I do want to ask, obviously, there's lots of different types of therapy. What would your definition of occupational therapy be?
Very important question. I should have started with this before you even asked me because nobody knows what OTs do. And it's so important for us to explain this. So the easiest way that I say to explain it is that occupational therapists work with children on what occupies their time. So the things that are meaningful to them in daily life or the things they have to do in daily life. And with kids, this can mean anything from play skills, social skills, paying attention, being able to participate in school, in sports, in community activities like church, things like that. And so in our groups, and specifically at Outdoor Kids OT, we really focus on, the tagline is we help kids become more coordinated, confident, calm, and caring. And so the coordination piece is motor skills. Confidence is their self-esteem, their mental health, their self-advocacy. Calmness is self-regulation, being able to regulate your behaviors, your responses to things that happen in your environment or around you. And then caring is the social skill piece, like having connection with other people and being empathetic and taking others' perspectives, taking turns, things like that. So those are some of the things we work on at Outdoor Kids OT. And the general definition is that OTs work on whatever you need to do in daily life, helping you participate in daily life.
That was a very good, succinct definition of like, what is an OT? What does occupational therapy do? What is the purpose of it? And it's really interesting because it's kind of this intersection, at least the way you were describing it with kids, this intersection of literal physical therapy, right? Like if I were in a traumatic incident and I needed to regain use of my arm, I would go to a physical therapist to help me work out those motor skills. But in the realm of children, it's much larger than just physical motor skills, right? It's how all these interpersonal relationship skills and self-regulation and stuff like that. And it makes a lot of sense to me that you would be doing this in an outdoor setting because it's just an excellent sort of backdrop, a very natural backdrop to be working these skills with children.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So many things I want to say here. So the first thing is that really the Contigo approach, I developed it from the field of OT, but it is usable. I actually had a physical therapy friend. She was a physical therapist who I was talking with her as I was developing the approach. And she said, Laura, this is not just for OTs. This is for PTs like me. This is for speech therapists. This is for mental health counselors. This is for psychologists, psychiatrists, anyone who wants to take individual therapeutic work with children outdoors. They need this, and I was like, mind blown, like,
right, just completely shift the scale of what you're trying to do.
Because I was just so in my own little, I can only serve OTs because I'm an OT, and that's just not true. Like it really is. I developed it after that conversation with her in the early stages of kind of starting to develop the model. I actually had that in mind, that it was not just for OTs. So there's a lot of theory that informs it from psychology and from outdoor education and from occupational therapy, but it absolutely can be used by any professional. The other thing is that the description you gave is a great description of physical therapy. And I'm kind of envious of speech and physical therapists because like they say what they do and people are like, oh, I know what you do. You help with physical skills or you help with speech and language. And OT is really broader than that. Like it's looking at those things in their context and the environment and the child and everything that is going on in their family or in their context, right? So I think like OTs definitely refer out to speech therapists and physical therapists for their areas of expertise. And I see OT as being a little more global in looking at everything that a child may
all of the inputs into that child's life as well as the outputs.
Yeah, absolutely. Like all the things that may be impacting their development.
So what would lead a child to need your services? Like where do these students come from that they're now being helped by Outdoor Kids Occupational Therapy?
So we get a lot of our referrals from families themselves because they know something is a little bit challenging for their child. They see their child struggling to do things in daily life. They see their child not able to go to a playground and just play on the playground equipment. Or they see their child becoming really dysregulated and having emotional outbursts when they have a friend over to play because they can't navigate conflict. Or they can't manage when things in the family aren't going according to plan, according to the schedule, right? So it kind of depends on the unique challenges that child has. But I think, it's funny when you ask me that, I'm like in my brain right now, like, how do people find out about OT? Because I wonder if in some ways it's because I lived in an area where I started my practice in Oakland and Berkeley, California. The parents there's like a culture there of the parents are aware of OT. I don't really know why that might be, but they're aware that it is a service that can really support and help their child when they are having developmental challenges of some kind. And word of mouth, I think maybe just makes that happen. When an OT helps one family, they tell other families, and then that kind of snowballs from there. But, doctors will often refer to occupational therapists. Physical and speech and mental health counselors will refer to occupational therapists. I would say a lot of times when an OT is brought in, it's because of a child having sensory processing or emotional regulation, like self-regulation challenges. That's something that we're known for being really good at kind of investigating and digging under the surface to kind of see what's causing those challenges. But yeah, I think the referrals can come from a variety of different sources. They don't necessarily just come from healthcare professionals, but sometimes from parents themselves who just know that they need someone to look at all of the variables impacting why their child may be having challenges in daily life.
Cool. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I think it's something that people are starting to consider a little bit more as well and like just be aware of. As an occupational therapist, how did you get into being outdoors? Did you start as like an occupational therapist in an office and just say like, oh man, I think we should go outside? Or like, how did that, if it was a transition, how did that transition happen or how did it start?
Yeah, so I was really burned out. At the time that I started my master's program in 2013, I had been an OT for 13 years. And I did the logical thing when you're like burning out in your profession to go back to grad school in your same profession, you know?
Let's double down on this.
Yeah, right.
It'll get better.
Like, why was that the decision I made? I don't know. But it turned out to be the best thing ever. So when I was in this master's degree program, it was a post-professional program for people who had already been working in the field. So we had to do like a pretty intensive research project to complete the degree. And I had been working in school-based practice for 10 years in Oakland. I worked for Oakland Public Schools. And I just didn't really want to do a research project on school-based OT. Like, I was burning out because of the challenges of working in a system that sometimes didn't really give me freedom or the time really to do what I wanted to do in treatment, which was more holistic. So,
Right.
Yeah, so I ended up doing my master's thesis on taking nature outdoors. So I wrote like a proposal to bring an outdoor program into an urban school district. But in the process of doing that, started running these large group camps, realized that I really didn't want to run large group programs. It was super stressful. I couldn't give kids the attention that I wanted to give them, who were the kids that I was typically working with as an OT. And I wanted to do more individualized therapeutic support for them that was really individualized to them and what they needed. And so that's when I started doing more of the small groups. So I came at it from this master's thesis I had to do, and then the work kind of took its own detours.
You were like, wow, I
down.
really like this. This is working out really well.
Yeah. Yeah. And it really did like reinvigorate my love of my profession. I tell a story, I have told a story publicly about I guided backpacking trips right out of OT school, like the summer before my last year of OT school and right after OT school, I guided backpacking trips. And this was in 99 and 2000. I've been an OT for 21 years now. So, and I remember being in Colorado and standing on top of one of these 14ers with a friend of mine and thinking, you know, I'm fresh out of OT school. I'm like, the world is going to be so impacted by the wonderful things that I can do, you know?
Yeah.
Like how you are when you're 22, however old I was. And I had this moment where I was like, I just want to do something where I work as a pediatric OT and something outdoors. And then like life unfolds, you know?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I got married to like a Puerto Rican man who was raised in the inner city and did not like nature. With nature stuff, I feel like sometimes I'm like, am I a poser that my whole family does not love nature and want to be out there? But I think it's actually, I do feel like sometimes there's this perception that we need to be so outdoorsy to be able to do this work.
And that like sitting on your couch watching Netflix, you're like, I'm a fraud.
Yes. This is not true, people. You can be an outdoor therapist even if you don't know the names of every plant and you're not a naturalist. Like, so anyway, I married my husband, who's a wonderful man. I love him dearly, and he has learned to like being outdoors. I've taken them backpacking and all kinds of things. And then, you know, we had 3 kids, and it was just like life kind of unfolded, and I sort of forgot about it. And I really did feel like when I started doing outdoor work as an OT, it was like, oh my gosh, this is that dream I had on top of the mountain. It looks a little different than I thought. But I really do feel like it, not just for me, but in the therapists that I've worked with, like it completely changes your life as a therapist. It changes your whole perspective. That's something coming up in my research, that it changes people's perceptions of therapy even when they're in an indoor setting. Even if they're working in school-based practice and they start to do some of this outdoor work, your whole perspective shifts when you're working indoors as well. And your mind changes as a therapist to think about including nature in what you're doing, it just completely changes your work as a therapist in good ways.
Yeah, like it doesn't have to be all or nothing.
Yeah.
I love it. Are you able to share any like really awesome success stories? Anything that like when you first saw students, doing OT outdoors that you were like, wow, that never would have happened if we weren't doing this specific type of programming?
Yeah. Oh, so many stories. I think specifically this would probably be a story of a couple of different kids combined into one vignette or whatever they call them. But I think the thing that I noticed right away as an OT was the difference between an indoor clinic-based setting or a school-based setting and the nature environment for kids that have what we call tactile defensiveness. So the kids who don't want to touch Play-Doh, they don't want to put their hands in shaving cream, they don't want the things that you do in preschool that all kids love, or you think all kids love, right? There are kids who truly have differences in how they process that tactile, the touch sensation. And I have seen kids in treatment in clinic settings or in the schools who will gag. They have like a visceral response when their hands touch something that is uncomfortable to them.
Yeah.
And so you can't really learn and grow as a child if you don't have all of those sensory experiences, right? Not just tactile, but all sensory experiences.
Well, that's a huge way of how we explore, right? It's oftentimes the first really intimate connection to a foreign object, is you see it and maybe you smell it, but the first time you really interact with it is when you're touching it.
Absolutely. Spoken like a great OT. You should be an OT.
Don't give him any more ideas.
Great point. When you're done having 1 million podcast episodes, you can
Deal.
Go to OT school.
I'll give you a call.
But it's so true. It's so true that it is like using their hands to touch something is a way that kids engage with the world. It's a layer of meaning that they need to have in order to grow and develop, right? So the kids in the clinic, what we would typically do is what I think is try to make it like nature, basically. So we'd fill a big, shallow box full of like beans or rice, and we would hide toys in it, and they'd have to like find the toys, and they get that sensation of like the different textures of things on their hands. Or we'd, maybe shaving cream on a tabletop, playing in that, or playing in water indoors. Now, outdoors, when I took my sessions outdoors, I don't have to like contrive anything.
Right.
It's
There's
just
a million different tactile opportunities.
Like so much more than you could ever replicate indoors. And I am huge on this. I will debate anyone and I will win to say there are just experiences in nature that you cannot replicate in a clinic that kids absolutely need. And especially the kids that we work with in therapeutic ways. Like these kids need these experiences even more than neurotypical children. Like they need enriched sensory experiences in order to function in the world as adults, and to have that to go back to have nature to go back to as like a solace and a respite from the stressors of daily life, right? So in nature, what we see is that kids who come to the first session and are crying when they get their hands muddy, or very hesitant to touch things, or don't want to climb the tree because it feels weird to them, in like 2 or 3 sessions, they're knee deep in water, they're throwing rocks in the lake, they're climbing trees, they're digging in the mud, they're picking up earthworms, or better yet, banana slugs. If you're in California, those things are huge.
They're amazing.
Yeah. So like those experiences, like no matter what we did in an indoor clinic, like you could try to make it the most sensory rich experience ever indoors, but one, it's not natural. It's like a contrived environment that then the family can't carry over to their daily life, you know? And nature offers all of this stuff to us for free out there just for us to explore, and also is accessible to families to do it. It makes it more like the families understand the value of those experiences and are able to give them to their children.
Right, because with therapy, I mean, as much as you can do in a 90-minute session, that's awesome, but it pales in comparison to what repeating those experiences outside of a therapeutic session will do, right? So if the family is able to also provide a similar experience for the student outside of their 90 minutes a week that they get to be with you, it's going to greatly increase the amount of impact that the work that you're doing has on that child and the outcomes for that child, right?
Yeah, because they're with the kid 24/7. 90 minutes a week will do nothing. The same way if you just worked out 90 minutes a week.
Right. It's not going to have the holistic effect on your body that you need to have. It's the repeated exposure that really changes people.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of other ones. The tactile defensiveness one is huge. Like, I just see so much rapid change in that, like in a few sessions that to me would take months in a clinic. And to think about saving families money. I mean, that's where it's like, if you're going to spend time in therapy and you're going to be paying for your child to come to therapy, like my practice in the Bay Area is cash-based, and most nature-based practices are, because it's a challenging model to kind of squeeze into the medical model. It's more of a health and wellness approach, a developmental approach.
Right.
Because you're supporting so many things that like our medical system in the US would say are not medically based need. They're not medically necessary.
You're not going to die if you don't do this.
Yeah. So many nature-based practices are cash pay, and there's ways you can serve a wide variety of clients by scholarships and funding and grants and things like that. But I think about just the getting better outcomes more quickly. I think it serves families well because they don't have to pay for therapy as long. You know,
yeah, absolutely.
Their kid makes progress quicker. They see progress more quickly. The other things too, like I think maybe some of this is on my mind just because of conversations I've had today, but there's a lot of research out there about attention and kids with ADHD benefiting from being in natural settings. And I think the attention piece is something that every therapist I know is concerned about because kids are on screens so much and they're not moving as much as they used to. And that lends to having very limited attention spans. And so when you're outdoors, there's just so many things that naturally rivet the attention.
Right.
You know, like who's not going to look at an owl in the tree 20 feet above you? It's just riveting. And so it trains kids to notice and look for things. And I think that actually may have carryover into daily life in ways that we haven't explored yet.
That's absolutely a life skill.
Yeah.
Right. More than just, this tiny little thing that you get to check off. Like, yeah, they had great attention span during this session. It's like, no, that's absolutely one of the few places in their life, if they're spending a lot of their time on screens, that is not designed to offer a new novel sensation every 30 seconds, right? It's one of the very few places where they're going to get a continuous, this is the thing that we're looking at for an extended period of time. And that's absolutely critical. Completely agree with that.
Yeah.
Before we started this episode, you were telling us a little bit about your getting your PhD and the findings that you've noticed throughout that experience and some things you found that you didn't expect to. And I do want to talk about that just a little. So what have you found that you didn't expect?
Yeah, that was the conversation where we were like, we should be recording this.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah, so I'm studying pediatric occupational therapy because my PhD is going to be in occupational therapy. So it is not a multidisciplinary study. So I should state that before I start. But one of the things that has really surprised me is that I thought what I was going to hear is all about how nature-based occupational therapy is beneficial for the children we're serving. So the study is based on therapists who are working with children ages 0 to 12 in nature, and they can define nature any way they want. It was up to them to define nature-based therapy however they wanted to define it. And the only criteria was that they were working with children 0 to 12 in nature-based therapy according to their definition. And the question that I'm looking at, it's a grounded theory study, and I'm looking at what is the process of nature-based occupational therapy? Like, how do we bring about change? What's going on here? Essentially, is the research question is much more formal than that. But essentially, when I'm interviewing these therapists, I'm really looking at what is going on here. I tell everyone it's the kind of research Brene Brown does because everybody knows Brene Brown. Like, she interviews a lot of people and then pulls out from those interviews what's going on here. What can we say that is true about the process of nature-based occupational therapy? So I thought I was going to find the benefits for the children. I thought the therapists were going to be focusing on some of the things I've talked about, the multisensory engagement and the health benefits of being outdoors with fresh air and the opportunities for movement. I am hearing all of these things. They were not surprising, right? But what was really surprising to me, which I should have known from my own experience, but hearing it over and over and over, it just got this light bulb moment of like, this is not just for the kids. This is renewing therapists' love of their work as well. It's making them better therapists because they're able to, people consistently say, I feel like when I'm in nature, I can just slow down and be with the child. And there's not this contrived pressure of the indoor environment, which sort of kind of tells us what to do. The indoor clinic, it's like you sit in this chair. You sit in the swing.
We go from A to B to C to D, and then we're done.
Yeah. And in nature, it's like wide open. What are you going to do out here? Who knows? You know?
Yeah.
Let's find out.
Yeah, let's find out. It's adventurous, right? Yeah, the therapists are just talking about how it has given them peace, joy, contentment in their work, like renewed love of their work. Some of them are saying that there's relational connection there that they don't feel like would have been possible in an indoor setting. There's a freedom, I think, on the part of therapists and on the part of children to be oneself in nature. It's a space where power dynamics kind of get leveled, where in the indoor setting, it's like the therapist works here. The therapist controls the environment.
Oh, that's a very interesting take on it, that it levels that power dynamic because nobody owns the outdoor space, right? This is a place where you and the patient are on equal footing.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Mm-hmm. It is to me too. It is to me too, because one of the tenets of sensory integration theory, which is a huge theory that has influenced the Contigo approach as well as millions of pediatric OTs around the world. You know, the theory is that we need to be able to integrate all of our senses in order to participate in daily life, to do the things we need to do in daily life, and that is foundational, right? Our brain needs to be able to understand and integrate and respond to sensory information. That's the basic theory. So there's a whole realm of practice that has come out of this theory, which was created in the 70s by Jean Ayres. She was a brilliant neuroscientist and OT. And there's this whole practice that has come out of that called sensory integration therapy, right? So a lot of pediatric therapists use sensory integration in their practice. I'd say it's probably the most used framework or theory in pediatric OT. And one of the things that's really great lately is that they are coming out with like measures of fidelity to show like what is sensory integration therapy. And specifically what I'm going to speak to is what is Ayres sensory integration. ASI is what they call it. ASI has outlined like 9 tenets that you have to have in order for an intervention to be truly Ayres sensory integration therapy. And the reason they did this and outlined these 9 things was because they wanted to be able to research it. What they found in the research was that the research was kind of willy-nilly, like all over the map. Like people weren't really saying, they were calling something sensory integration, doing this study, but then not really saying that they were doing what Ayres originally proposed in her original research, right? So there are brilliant people in our profession working on this, and I admire and respect so much that they are doing research and they want to like show that sensory integration, Ayres sensory integration in particular, is effective. The challenge I would give is that one of those tenets is that the therapist, I'm gonna state it wrong, I don't have it in front of me right now, but essentially it is that the therapy needs to be done in an environment with large equipment that can be moved by the therapist to give the child the just right challenge. So that's a big term in sensory integration, is the just right challenge. You want to challenge a child just enough, but not so much that they're going to melt down and not be able to do it. So when I look at the outdoor work that we do in my practice, and when I use the Contigo approach to apply it to practice, it meets like 8 of the 9 criteria for Ayres sensory integration.
Right.
Like, because it's things, you know, the other things are like building a rapport with the child and letting the child kind of lead the session. Those are many things that like lots of OTs do in practice. That 9th tenet, well, I don't know if it's number 9, but that one tenet of it has to be in a space where there's movable equipment that the therapist can move. I can't do that outdoors, right? But the crazy thing is that in my research, I'm like, I actually think that's the benefit of therapy outdoors.
Interesting.
It's like the benefit is that we're not doing that. The benefit is that we can't control the environment. The benefit is that kids have to adapt and be flexible in a power neutral space where it's not like, well, why did you put that bolster there? Because I can't climb over it. It's more like, whoa, this tree fell down.
How are we going to respond to that?
Yes, we have to climb over. Should we go around? There's problem solving there. Like,
If the whole goal is to give kids the foundation that they need to deal with day-to-day life, there are challenges in day-to-day life that are going to be presented by outside forces. And so if in a therapeutic session with a guide that can help manage and provide a framework to work with, you come across challenges from outside forces, you learn how to deal with those. And that's the whole point of the therapy, right?
Yeah.
So it's not these contrived challenges that we're trying to meet. It's real world challenges that are going to be so much more beneficial to dealing with the real world, right?
Yes. And that's like one of my favorite theories in occupational therapy is called occupational adaptation theory. It's not very popular because it's super complex. And it took me like a whole 3-unit class for a whole semester to understand it. I was like complaining to my whole cohort how stupid it was and how I just thought it was too complex for normal practice. And like, why do they even teach us this? Because it's just not applicable to practice. And like by the end of the class, I was like, oh my gosh, this is like the best theory ever. But the reason that I fell in love with it after I studied it, and I do try to teach it when I talk about it in my course and when I talk with therapists about it, I try to teach it in a way that's very practical. But the thing I love about it is that the basic tenet of it is that the point of good therapy, and I would argue any kind of pediatric therapy, that it applies even outside of OT, but the point of any good therapy is that the child has increased relative mastery. They have the ability to like master things, to try things that are new and novel to them. And they also have increased ability to adapt. They call it adaptive capacity. See what I mean? They use all these words like relative mastery, adaptive capacity. It's like, blah, 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 blah. Like, just use real words, people, But to me, that is key, that theory in particular is saying like, the point is not that the child, like, yes, we write therapy goals for like specific skills, like that they will initiate play with a peer. That's a skill, right? To be able to ask a child if they want to play or enter play with a peer during maybe our small groups. So that might be a goal we're working on, but ultimately, good therapy, it's not about skill development. It's about like that child's internal sense of agency, getting them to feel like they can be a master of something, that they can try new things, and that they have the ability to adapt when they face future challenges in life. And that to me just resonated. It was like, oh my gosh, this is such a beautiful theory because it focuses us on what is really important for kids. And we all know is really important for kids. It's not about that little splinter skill. When they're little, we would write a goal for like them to stack a block. And I'm always like, it's not to stack a block. It's actually the sense of confidence that they have when they stack that block at the age of 2 or 18 months or whenever they are, when they're little bitty. That then they learn to master the world. They learn confidence. That
I can interact with my world and make it do what I want it to do.
Yes.
That's what stacking a block means. That's yes, you're literally stacking a block, but it is so much more than that.
Yeah.
That's absolutely awesome.
So we could probably continue this episode forever. And hopefully once you're done with your PhD, we can maybe do another interview. But for today, to wrap up, where would people go to find out more about Outdoor Kids Occupational Therapy, your work, and your podcast that you're doing if they want to continue listening to your beautiful voice?
Yeah. So I just niched all of my work to work with nature-based pediatric practitioners. So I have my practice is outdoorkidsot.com. You can go there to see the website and the practice. And then I niched my work recently to work all with nature-based practitioners and put everything I do under the umbrella of therapyinthegreatoutdoors.com. So if you're listening to this and you are a pediatric professional who works with children, you're interested in this type of work, you can go there and find a bunch of free resources. So I do have a podcast called Therapy in the Great Outdoors, the business and practice of nature-based pediatric therapy. I'm really big on helping therapists start businesses that actually are personally fulfilling for them because they're outdoors and also massively impactful in their communities by changing kids' lives. So all of the resources can be found at Therapy in the Great Outdoors. I'm on Instagram at Laura Park Fig, and my practice is at Outdoor Kids OT.
Awesome. So if you guys are listening and you'd like to learn a little bit more about her and what she does, scrolling down to the show notes, we're going to drop links right there so you guys can go from this episode to learning more about this incredible work, getting kids to feel confident in themselves in the great outdoors. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us on the show.
Oh, I loved it. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Conservation Connection.
If you enjoyed our podcast, go ahead and subscribe to make sure you catch every episode that we post.
We'd love to hear from you. So if you want to reach out, go to our website, lastchanceendeavors.com/contact and shoot us an email.
We love questions from our listeners, so if you heard something that you want to know more about, be sure to let us know.
If you've got a minute to spare, leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts will help other conservation-minded people find the show. We'd really appreciate it.
A big thanks to the people working to protect our planet, and a big thanks to you for listening. Don't forget to tune in next week.